Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Seaman, and I am the host of Get Hired Live and the editor for job searches and careers at LinkedIn News. Welcome to our show. We have so many people joining us today, and I'm so happy that you're here. In fact, I see Sabrina from Texas, Siva from India, Misty from Tennessee, and Roberto from London. So you're joining us from all over the world, and I'm so happy that you're here. Keep introducing yourself in the comments. Tell us your name, where you're from, and also tell us a little bit about your job search and your career. So maybe you're looking to move into a new field, maybe you're looking to move into a new industry, or just looking for a new job in the one that you're currently in. And then what I want you to do is keep an eye out in the chat for people who are also looking for the same thing you are, or maybe they are already in the field where you want to go to, and connect with each other, because networking is really the foundation of a successful job search. And what better time to start than right now? So build those connections, and some of the best conversations that I see actually happen after the show, when people connect and they end up helping each other with their job search. And there's research suggesting that people who job search together in a group end up finding work faster than people who end up going it alone. So keep introducing yourself. Like I said, I see so many people in the comments already. We have Bill from Arizona, Antoine from Georgia, Katie from Omaha, Madeline from New York, where I am, Lawson from Toronto, Sharon from Pennsylvania, my home state, Tony from Virginia, Somnath from India, Spencer from California, and Cynthia from Mexico in Mexico City. So like I said, keep introducing yourselves, and also get your questions in, because we'll be talking all about job searching and your career search, because we have such a wonderful guest today. In fact, let's bring her on the screen. It's Caroline Ceniza-Levine. Caroline, welcome to the show. You are a career expert and the founder of the Dream Career Club.
Thanks so much for having me on, Andrew.
Yes, and we wanted to talk a little bit about fear. And basically, fear is obviously something that comes with job searching. Either you could be unemployed and worry about the unknown and have this just inherent fear. But I wanted to kick off by asking a little bit about, why do you think that fear is such an obstacle for job seekers?
Yeah, I hear a lot from job seekers, of course, as a career coach. I'm a longtime recruiter, so I have a window into people's careers. And I have to say that a lot of the questions that I hear about people's careers are rooted in fear. So there's fear of making some sort of tactical mistake, right? So saying the wrong thing at an interview, negotiating too hard, or making a networking snafu, getting rejected when you're networking. But then there's some of these larger fears, and I call one of them, FOMO, fear of missing out, right? So if I make this career move, that precludes me from making this other career decision, or that puts me on a path where, potentially there's no turning back. And then, so that keeps people kind of in inertia. And then finally, if they do make a choice, there's this fear of making the wrong choice. And all of a sudden there's no turning back.
Yeah, and I think, at least for the one about making the wrong choice, I think what people should know is that your career tends to be very forgiving, and there's no one path. So it's okay sometimes if you make a misstep, right?
Absolutely. You absolutely can get it back. I mean, a career is made up of several jobs. And so, and jobs are running your own business, or just choices, right? A sabbatical, coming back from that. So there are always ways to get back on the path.
Yeah. And for people who are out there listening to us, I want you to tell us if you have any fears, if you feel like sharing, obviously. But tell us what your fears are in your career or your job search. And I know there could be a lot of fear going on right now. So tell us in the comments what they are. And, we have so many people joining us: Lisa from Ohio, Stephanie from Germany, Adriana from Brazil, Esther from New York City, again, where I am. So just keep introducing yourselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll be taking your questions in just a bit. So Caroline, I guess, when it comes to fear, what do you think is sort of like the top tips for overcoming it during your job search?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first, of course, is to name your fear, to really identify it so that you can take the appropriate steps to manage it. And, one of those steps is to shrink whatever it is that you're afraid of so that it is manageable. So we talked a little bit about this already, Andrew, when we talked about, the fear of making the wrong choice, really just getting comfortable with the fact that this is a decision that I'm making for now. and I can always get back on the path. And if you're really, really concerned about it, one of the things you can do is to stay active potentially in some other areas that you're interested in, so that if you do decide, hey, I want to shift, you'll already have some activity going there. So you can shrink your fear. The other thing that you can do is you can actually, redefine the fear so that you're not so afraid of it. You feel like you can surmount it. So if you think about some of the tactical mistakes that I talked about regarding, negotiating the wrong way or interviewing the wrong way, with practice, with preparation, you can really just get used to both networking, negotiating, interviewing, get used to all of those things and really feel like, this is something that I can do. It's not such an amorphous, difficult thing. And then finally, you can replace one fear with potentially, something else, another idea. And so with something like fear of missing out, which honestly was a big fear that I dealt with my career, because I'm interested in a lot of things. And I always felt like if I'm focusing in one area, I'm neglecting something else, or maybe it's pigeonholing me in some way. And I really kind of replaced that fear with a fear of indecision. And I realized that if I didn't make any choices, then I would be stuck in this kind of purgatory. And as I sat in that situation and just visualized that a little bit more, that actually got me going. And so sometimes you can actually replace one fear with another that's more motivational and more helpful.
Yeah, I think those are all really good pieces of advice, especially the idea of sort of naming your fears and sort of taking a look at them and saying, is this really what I'm afraid of, or is it in place of something else? And I think sometimes if you actually face your fears in terms of like really sitting down and thinking about them, you end up seeing that really what you were afraid of is just a substitution for something else, and it helps you address the actual problem.
Yeah. And, and that you can take a step and, it'll make the fear not go away necessarily, but at least, give you enough courage to move through it. Again, just doing some preparation or some practice or some visualization on the other side. Any small action can just help you get moving, and that momentum builds.
Yeah, and we have a lot of members in the stream who are sharing their fears with us. And we have Nakia, who says the fear of not being able to pay my bills, which I think is a very legitimate one that comes with job searching sometimes. Jamie, who says not sure if a job is a good fit. And obviously, like you said, that is a key one where people say, should I apply for this job? Should I not? Jamie, who says, again, I already read that one. Rob, who said they're tired of being rejected and job searching feels like a dead end. Katie, who said they're scared that I will make the wrong decision. Tracy, who says they have been recently laid off where they were for 18 years and fear of change, failure, and not finding a job. And so I think, one message that people could take away from that definitely is that if you are afraid, if you do have fears of job searching, you're not alone. And probably those fears probably resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And even having an accountability partner, just someone where you can express your fears and then also get encouragement from, and you can encourage each other and then move on. So these forums are great. Just hearing that other people are going through the same thing, like you said, Andrew.
Yeah, and also, like I said at the top of the broadcast, like job search groups where people can sort of empathize with each other and say, hey, I'm going through the same thing, or I have a similar issue. I think that really helps, because job searching can be really lonely if you don't know someone else who's job searching in your orbit, or someone who's not open to sharing. So I think that's really good to have that sort of buddy with you or something to sort of swap stories with.
Absolutely.
And, we have, a lot of people who are asking questions, and I think that's probably one way to help them overcome their fears, of giving them answers. And we have a question here from Ravi. And Ravi basically wants to know why recruiters are resistant to hiring people from outside their field. So, there's a lot of people who are looking to change careers, change fields, and you've been a recruiter. So when it comes down to looking at people who want to switch careers, what advice do you have? And do you feel that they do face a larger uphill battle?
Yeah, career changers absolutely do. And I say that as a career changer. I was a music major in college and I trained as a classical pianist. And then my first job was in banking. So I totally, totally get that. I always say that the recruiter self would not hire my career changer self, because I think people misdefine what a recruiter's job is. They'll say, well, the recruiter is there to make a hire and to hire the best person for the job. That's actually not true. The employer is always trying to hire the best person for the job, and they hire the recruiter to find them the candidates that they say that they want. And many times that could be a career changer, but that's not what the employer is asking for. The employer is asking for someone who has done the job before in a similar company, in a similar industry, in a similar market situation. And so there's a very, very tight constraint around that for the recruiter. The people who can make a decision about, let's bring this career changer on, are the immediate hiring manager and that hiring team. So if you're looking for a job in marketing, it would be the marketing team. In sales, it would be the sales team. In HR, it could very well be the recruiter and the HR team, because they're hiring for that particular role. They know the problem that they're trying to solve, and they can look at a career changer and say, yes, this person can solve my problem. But it's very difficult to make that suggestion from the outside, because the employer is just going to say, well, I wanted you to hire me a marketing person or a salesperson or fill in the blank, and not show me someone who hasn't done that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And like you said, you've gone through a career change before, you've pivoted. And I think it's just good to know that other people have done that too. So it's not that you're doing this the first time alone, and it's completely unheard of. People out there should know that there are other people who have done those transitions before. So I think that advice will be really helpful to them. And we have a question from Shelley, who says she has a fear of being stuck where she lives. And I think that's probably something where a lot of people feel, oh, if I lived here, because there's so many more job openings. And now that there's a lot of openings that are flexible or remote, what's your advice for people to maybe look outside their area and go after a job that isn't in their backyard, but maybe they could do remotely?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of that. You'll see positions that actually will say remote. I think one of the things you should think about is that it's always helpful to potentially go to the location at some point if you're thinking about being considered as a candidate. So that's always, one tactic. If you decide that you might want to look at a specific geography, it's to know that geography. Looking for a job in, let's say, New York and San Francisco are very different, even though they're both coastal cities. They're both meccas for tech. But they just have different cultures and customs. And so you want to make sure that you understand the geography that you're looking at, that you understand that market, who the key players are. And so that even as an outside candidate, let's say that you're in Des Moines and you're applying for a job in Chicago, that you can very easily talk about what the Chicago market is like, and for that company that you're applying to, who their competitors are, the things that they might be facing. You want to minimize your appearance as an outsider. That's true as a career changer, and that's true as someone who might be outside the geography. You really want to know the area that you say that you're interested in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic point, because if you sort of rush in there and say, oh yeah, I could do this job, and maybe your skills are transferable to different markets, but you at least have to do some of that research. And that will also help you overcome your fears if you have a more grounded perspective of what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Employers hire people to solve a problem for them who have done the job in some way. And remember, it doesn't have to be done the job as a permanent full-time job. It could be that you're very well researched. It could be that you've taken a course in whatever it is that you say that you're interested in, and therefore you have some coursework and some skills already developed. It could be that you're consulting or volunteering on the side, and that's how you know that area. So there are a number of ways that you can prove that you're genuinely interested and qualified for something without having to have a job specifically in that role and in that geography.
Yeah, very good point. And we have a few people here who talk about a fear that I think is incredibly common. And it's Deborah and Manawara who says they're afraid of ageism. And ageism is obviously a real thing. We see that people who are older tend to spend more time unemployed, have a more difficult time getting back in the job market. What is your recommendation for overcoming ageism and to maybe reduce the risk of being, discriminated against for your age?
Yeah, I think, to piece apart why, let's say, a resume might not get through if someone has 30 years of experience, applying for a job that requires, let's say, 10 years of experience. And one can look at that and say, oh, it's ageism, because you can back out how old someone might be with those 30 years. But the other part of it is, if I'm a potential employer, I might be thinking, well, this is a job that requires 10 years of experience, and this person has much more, and they might be using this as a stopgap job and just might leave as soon as they can get something better. It also could be, and again, I'm not looking at people's resumes, but it could also be that a lot of the things that you've been working on are, not updated for this market. So I was in media for a long time before going out on my own, and there were folks there. I was in publishing, and they had very experienced print related backgrounds when everything was moving to digital. And so the 30 years of experience that they might have maybe had 1 or 2 years of digital. And so they're saying, well, I have all of this experience, but not in the world that they're moving to. So you also have to look at that just in terms of, are we talking about many years of experience in the specific area that the employer is exactly hiring for. They also might think that you're too expensive. There are a number of reasons why things get stopped at the resume filter. And frankly, this is why, and I say this as a recruiter and I say this as a career changer, I don't like resume filters. This is why I always try to network my way into a conversation with someone, really try to understand that company and try to understand what they need, so that when I'm pitching, whether it's myself as a consultant or if I were a job candidate, I would be able to address exactly what it was that they were looking for.
Yeah. And when it comes to your resume, actually, that I think that's a good segue to this question from Martin, who asked, how do I market some of my quote unquote older experiences and skills when applying to jobs today? And when you're crafting a resume, especially if you have skills or experiences that may not be relevant anymore, do you have to edit that? So, obviously, I think one thing today is you don't necessarily want to list Microsoft Office as one of your skills, because that's sort of, everyone should have that. But how do you think that people who have been in the job market for a while market their skills successfully?
Well, employers, recruiters, hiring managers, they spend seconds skimming a resume. And so I think there are too many job seekers who are looking at the 5th bullet of the 4th job and saying, how exactly do I word this in a way that's going to capture attention? You're assuming that they're reading all the way through. I think a well-designed summary of qualifications right at the top that speaks to specific skills that are most relevant in whatever area. So again, thinking industry, the functional area, the role, and the geography, what is most relevant for that trifecta that really, really defines what your job target is. Pull out things like, the size of teams that you've managed, if you have, or the size of budgets, any kind of quantifiable results. We want to be able to see, I have this problem and Martin can solve this problem because I've seen that he's done X, Y, Z. That's really what they're looking for. And that's why the summary is the most important thing. And then they're skimming everything else to look that there's a progression in terms of progression of skill sets, of title and education. They might look at that. They might look at the skills at the bottom, but we're not reading, bullet by bullet. That's really for the interview. And so just make no mistake. It's not that I want you to have a sloppy or incomplete resume either, but you really want to spend your time where it matters. That's the summary. That's making sure that your resume is easy to skim, and then get out there and start talking to people, because people hire people.
Yeah. And I think you might be psychic when it comes to these questions because you mentioned the progression of a position. And we have a question from William who says, does having 20 years of experience with the same company have a red flag with recruiters and hiring managers?
No, it doesn't have a red flag, especially, if there are industries where there isn't generally a lot of turnover. I would say in general, and again, I'm saying in general, the tech industry, for example, is notorious for people jumping around, and it's very, very well accepted. And so someone who is in the same job, that they're going to stick out more than someone who's, 2, 3, 5 years in each job, sometimes even less than that. But it's not necessarily a red flag. What we're looking for is a progression over time. So if it's the same job, it shouldn't be the same titles. It shouldn't be the same responsibilities. And so you should be able to point to specific instances where your role has changed every several years, or where we can see that projects have gotten more complex, or more cross-functional, potentially just bigger. And so that's the way that you can show progression, even if it's the same company.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic advice. Like you said, that progression. People like to see that you've had growth in your career and that you take on additional responsibilities as you get more comfortable. So that idea of sort of putting that on paper and saying, here's how I grew in this role, even though I didn't move around that much. Because before I came to LinkedIn, I was in traditional media, and I was there for 7 years. And as sort of a millennial, I always felt weird because I saw my friends bouncing from job to job. And I'm like, is there something wrong with me? But when I look back, I say, oh, I got a promotion here. I moved into a new role at this point. So I was changing jobs. It was just internally, and I wasn't going to new employers, which was actually more stable and better for me. It was just that other people looked outside their employers. So
yeah, and longer tenures are an advantage as you go further in your career, because it will take longer to get those measurable results as you get more senior, because the projects do become more complex. We also want to see year over year results. You didn't just get lucky one year and then you leave and then you get lucky somewhere else. We also like to see that you can survive in up and down markets. And so that's something that you see over time. So there's definitely a place for tenure, for sure.
Got it. And we have a question here from Madeline, and it might be Madeline. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. But she says, I have a career gap on my resume. How do I overcome it during the interview process? And I think a lot of people are in this boat right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a client who took, I think it was, almost 15 years. I mean, she took a gap until her kids were essentially out of the house. But during that time, she did some volunteering, and not when they were young. It was really towards the tail end. And so she had these two hesitations. And she said, well, I wasn't paid for what I was doing, and I really have only done it for the last couple of years. And it doesn't matter. Recency is actually really, really helpful. And so I really prepped her to get used to talking about herself as a fundraiser, as an event planner, as a community organizer, which were really the roles that she was playing on a volunteer basis. Absolutely. And even though the meat of these activities happened, I would say, really pretty recently. So for the first, 10, 12, 13 years, she was 100% focused on the kids. Because these were recent and she was able to talk through what she could do, really the employers that spoke to her could see her as someone who could solve their problem right away. And she was able to get hired, even with that gap. And that just goes to say that at the end of the day, the employer is not sitting there thinking, I don't want someone with a gap. They're thinking, I want someone whose skills are updated, who can come and, solve my problem right away, who doesn't need a lot of hand-holding to survive in an office environment. I need to know that they can be productive from day one. And so what you want to focus on, whether your gap is 15 months or 15 years, is, what were you doing at that time? That is relevant to the employer. So you don't have to justify why you took time off. We don't need a long story about the reasons that you decided to do it. We really just want to hear, again, skills, expertise, familiarity with kind of the office environment, office culture. Have you been in and around, other professional people in your industry or role? Joining an association would definitely count as keeping yourself active, taking a course, volunteering, consulting. There are a lot of things that you can be doing. And of course, being very well researched. And so if you can talk like you're an insider, if you're familiar with the competitors and you're familiar with what's happening in your industry, the other person is going to really believe that you know what you're doing. And they're going to feel like you're already on the inside. Again, even if you haven't worked a permanent full-time job there.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And, subscribing to people's newsletters or having that professional affiliation with an organization, you could read their publications or attend their training. So it's that you keep up with everything. So I think that's really good advice. And we have a question here, and this is about moving. And I know we already talked a little bit about that, but Josh says that one of his fears is making a career move and having to rebuild their professional network in a new city. Do you have any advice for how to get started?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And, as a recruiter, when I would hire people outside, so let's say I'm hiring someone from New York and I have people, I'm doing a national search and someone's going to be coming from the outside and they don't know anyone in New York. I always worry about an organ transplant that doesn't take. So it is a legitimate concern that you're not going to have allies and supporters, just people that you can hang out with. But you can do that. And I am not paid by LinkedIn to say this, but you can do that so easily now with social networks like LinkedIn. I mean, let's face it, to build a network now anywhere, you really can do it by figuring out like who are the companies that are out there or the professional associations that are out there, and then who are the people that make up these companies and make up these associations. And you can reach out to them even if you're Des Moines trying to research Chicago or frankly New York and Australia or whatever it is. So you can really find people right now, people from your alma mater, people who worked at former companies that you were at who are now in that geography. You'd be surprised. Before I go on vacation anywhere, I usually actually go through my LinkedIn connections and just put the destination city. And I'm always like, oh my goodness, that person is out there now. You'll be surprised at how many people you know. So I don't think it's going to take you that long.
Yeah. And also, just asking your existing network, sort of like, hey, do you know of anyone in New York? Do you know of anyone, in Panama City, wherever you're going? And you'd be surprised because they know people and then that becomes your network. And eventually it just keeps growing, because even when I think about my network, I think of all the people who weren't really my first connections, but now they are, because my first connections, older first connections, were like, hey, you should meet this person, or if you're going there, you should reach out to this person. And you do that, and it's not so much about leaving your network behind, but it's carrying them with you and realizing that really the borders don't exist as much as they used to. So it's good to keep your proverbial Rolodex, just keep scrolling through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't know who people know. So even close friends or people that you consider close friends, you might not realize that they had worked in Panama City, to continue your example. And then all of a sudden you mention that you're going out there or you're thinking about going out there. And they're like, oh, did you know that I did my study abroad there or that I did an internship there? And they're connected there.
Yeah. And the only reason I use that example is because I went to a very small school in Pennsylvania of like a few dozen people graduated from my class with me. And I remember the one day one of them ended up in Panama City, and I was like, oh. So you never know where people are going to end up, like you said. And we have a question here from Dennis about the fear of not having in-demand skills due to your current job responsibilities. And I think this is something that a lot of people run into, and especially at the start of the pandemic, is that they've been in a job for a while and they realize that they can do their job, but they haven't necessarily kept up with new skills that are in demand. So what is your suggestion for someone like Dennis?
Well, you might be able to do something right where you work. So there might be a cross-functional project that you can raise your hand for, and then you'll get exposure not only to other skills, but to other people and to other departments. If you have a good relationship with your manager, let them know that you're interested in learning about different things. If your company is big enough that they have employee resource groups, or sometimes called affinity groups, so this could be the young leaders group, the working parents group, the military veterans, the Black employees. So there are a number of these affinity groups, and that's also a great way of meeting folks and just learning about different areas of the company. Pay attention in your company to what's in demand there, and so that you can position yourself for the right places. You can also volunteer to pick up these skills. There are some organizations, Taproot is one of them, where they'll connect professionals with volunteer opportunities. And it's a great way of flexing a skill that you don't normally use. I was never trained as a salesperson. And so one of the things that I do for causes that I really care about is that I actually volunteer to fundraise. And I think that fundraising is one of these great volunteer positions to have, because nobody wants to do it. And so you'll definitely get your pick of where to do it for, and it just makes you fearless about asking for things, about approaching people, about talking about money. So I think, volunteering is a way of developing those skills. Reading a book, taking a course, taking a class, taking a webinar. You don't have to get an out and out certification or a second, degree or anything like that necessarily. I mean, sometimes you might decide that that's something that you want to do, but you can start with just a book or a webinar, and build up from there. And then even joining professional associations in your field, they also might have some continuing education. And so you can get some coursework there. But I think it's very important to figure out, what are we talking about here in terms of skills? There are technical skills like, I feel like I need to know, R or Python, because data visualization is a big deal and I'm an analytical person. And so that's a good technical skill to have. Or it might be something like, I need to be a better negotiator, or I need to be a better communicator in difficult conversations. And so that's another kind of skill. So you also want to be thinking about, what exactly are we talking about in terms of skills?
Yeah, and I like your suggestion about fundraising, because I love fundraising, because it's such a direct transaction when I do it, at least, because I show up and I say, why I'm here and you know how to make me go away. So I love helping organizations fundraise. And, we only have a few minutes left, but we have a few people in the comments who are asking about resumes, and specifically what to do at the top of a resume. Luciana and Deepika want to know about what to put at the top of a resume. Is it a summary? Is it professional accomplishments? So what's your suggestion for resumes and also cover letters?
Yeah, I mean, it's less about what you call it, whether you call it summary, highlights, professional qualifications, professional summary, professional highlights, ... right? The important thing is that this is your most important real estate to guide the reader on what else they're going to see, to tantalize the reader to want to read more, and to potentially want to talk to you, invite you in for that exploratory meeting. And so you really want to summarize your key wins. You also want to summarize the size and the scale and the scope of your responsibility. So things like how many people you've managed, if you have management experience, or size of budget that you've managed, any kind of quantifiable metrics, revenues generated, costs saved, profit margins increase, size of events that you planned, types of clients that you serve. So there are a number of ways that you can really summarize your background in a way that the reader says, okay, so if I have this particular issue, this is who I'm going to call. Certainly industry expertise, if you've worked at a number of different industries. Obviously, if your resume is bank, you just mentioned financial services, but there are some people who have multiple industries, and it's helpful at the very top to be able to list what those are. If you have brand name companies all throughout your background, or if your clients are brand name companies and you can share who they are, that's also something to put at the top, because recognizable names are a good filter for employers when they're skimming, because they're going to look and they're going to say, okay, so this person has been working in and around, Fortune 500 companies or recognizable names. And so I know that they have a certain, a certain quality and a certain work product, or they're familiar with this type of company. And so that's also a very helpful shortcut.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Caroline. I think our viewers got so much out of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'd love to hear these questions and keep them coming. I love to answer questions when I'm blogging too. So this gives me a lot of ideas.
Of course, and I think hopefully people were following along at the bottom of the screen. We've been flashing your LinkedIn profile. I know you post a lot of great information, so hopefully people will be following you. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yes, and thank you all for joining us too. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. As always, you can find us here on Fridays, and we'll be at 11 a.m. Eastern time for the summer, just some summer hours, And then we will be off next week for a holiday, but we will be back the following week. And in fact, our broadcast on the LinkedIn news page will resume on Monday, July 12th. I almost said November. I'm skipping ahead, but it's Monday, July 12th. My colleague Nina Melendez will be talking to Dr. Marty Makare. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and they'll be discussing the high price of medical care in the United States, and that's at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So be sure to tune in for that. It is obviously a problem in the United States. I used to be a medical reporter and a health policy reporter, so I used to write a lot about this, and there's a lot to talk about. So tune in for that. And then, like I said, we will be back on Friday, July, I don't know what time of year it is, July 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So until then, take care of yourself, be safe. The pandemic situation is still in flux, so follow your local health guidelines. You can only be a good candidate. You can only get hired if you are well enough to do so. So until then, best of luck, and thank you again for joining us.